Good evening. Hope you're doing well. I think we're live. Just waiting to see the feed come through. Yep, feed looks good. So end of the week. Thank goodness. It's time to relax and do some hobby. So you might have noticed on Instagram earlier this week I had a go at some non-metallic metal on this Dwarf cannon. It's a bit of a mixed bag, but overall the effect is, it's fine. It was probably a bit of a brave move, in all honesty, to kind of combine trying NMM for the first time, also using heavy body acrylics for the first time, which again didn't quite get right, especially in the sense that really they are still a little bit thick. They have left a little bit of texture to it, but I think what I'm going to do is hit it with some Testors dull coat when I'm done to really try and knock back some of that texture. But overall, I think the effect is, it works. It does the trick. I feel like it clearly gets across the idea that this is metal, which is the main thing, right? So all that's really left is the wooden elements and the base, and then this will be ready to go. So to do the wooden elements, I'm going for another heavy body actually. Sticking with that theme for this, I'm using this raw sienna, which is a lovely kind of golden browny colour. I'm using scale 75 walnut, that's SC29, and scale 75 birch, which is SC25. You'll remember birch is one of my favourite colours from their range. And this whole thing actually is all the wooden elements are based in another heavy body acrylic, which is raw umber, from the same Liquitex professional heavy body acrylics line. These have been great actually, really kind of accessible, easy to use, not particularly expensive, and they come in these smaller tubes, these 22mm tubes, because realistically, like, I've got a couple that I've used for a long time, like the Winsor & Newton oil paint white, right? It's this huge tube, 200mm tube. It's fantastic. It will last forever. Like, I will never get through this paint, which is great, but at the same time unnecessary for most colours. Like, white is a heavy use colour. I use it a lot, especially in oil paints. Same when I buy their acrylic version. I buy these 60mm tubes. Again, slightly more cost effective because I know I'm going to get through them. But for a lot of these colours, raw sienna is a good example, right? How often am I really going to be using this? Do I really need a great big tube of the stuff? The whole point is that you get a lot out of these things, so I'm trying to make the most of them. So the basic idea is apply some kind of wood grain pattern to the flat surfaces, and then on these kind of textured surfaces to try and make it look a little bit like carved wood. Again, just kind of painting some textures around that, but more or less that's it for this miniature. There's not really all that much left to do, but nice, quiet, easy Friday stream. Maybe do an hour. Let's get some of that on the old palette and get started, I guess. It's the other thing, I must admit. Dropper bottles, may be great for hard bottle paints, but painting with tubes again has really reminded me that tubes are just the superior way of storing and applying in a controlled way acrylics and oils. To be honest, like there's a reason why artists have stuck with tubes for so long. They are just better in terms of storing and applying paint, in my opinion and recent experience. You may have noticed as well the kind of backdrop here is no longer that grey cutting mat. That cutting mat's still here, but I got I was sent the Frontier War Games, like, I don't know, painting station thing with the cushion on the bottom. This is it with the cushion taken off, but I've basically just added that. If I zoom out so you can see, wrong way. I've basically added it to my desk as my work surface, when it's not attached to the cushion. It's really nice because it's got these little kind of indents over here for their little miniature holders. It's got these trays at the back for holding paints and whatnot that are magnetised. Only lightly magnetised though, so you can easily move them. Like, I've just put a couple of paints in there, and the brush I'm not going to be using. I'm still using the 8408s that we tested on a previous stream, but I'm not going to be needing the size 6 for this particular job, so it's just chucked in there. But yeah, it's really great. It's got a little magnetised spot under this as well for the metal paint pot, metal water pot, sorry, that comes with it. But I don't need that while I'm upstairs. And like a light and a phone holder. I'll probably do like a little video kind of talking about it in more detail soon. But yeah, it's really good. I've got, like, it sounds really done to be like, oh yeah, it's great. It's a, it's a bit of wood and it's, it's nice, but whatever. But the ability to kind of paint comfortably with the right stuff almost anywhere is, it's helpful. It's just helpful. Okay, right, let's get some progress made on this. So I'm still using the Joe Sonia Magic Mix at the moment, mixed 50-50 with water. That's been particularly helpful when working with heavy body acrylics, actually. Like being able to bring them down to a good consistency really easily. It can be done with water, of course it can, but I think you have to maybe be a little bit more skilled to do it with water, and when I'm just starting out with them, it's nice to have that particular hurdle taken away. So I'm just going to go in with the number 2 at least to start with, and just start sketching in the sort of the carved textures that are here. Now I went backwards and forwards on whether or not to paint these in like this, or whether or not I should just dry brush it. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm still not sure I've made the right choice, but I've opted to paint them in. The biggest reason being that I really want this wood to have like a rich carved look, and dry brushing of course tends to give us a somewhat, well, dry and dusty look, right? The clue's in the name. And I could kind of do without that on this particular miniature, so we'll just go in and do this. I must admit, as I get more and more of these dwarves done, I'm getting dangerously close now to a full 1500 point list, to the point where I can get a game in, which would be nice. First time since what, 7th edition? No, sorry, maybe 6th. No, it would have been 7th edition fantasy, I believe. Not very good with remembering the numbers of the editions, but the one with the beautiful rulebook. That's the way I always try and remember it. Big leather bound tome, really nice. I was always a bit of a sucker for those really nice limited edition fantasy rulebooks. Not so much for the 40k ones. I always found the 40k ones were a bit naff by comparison. They never seem to put quite as much effort into them. That might just be my bias for fantasy showing through, you never know. But I never thought they looked as good, if I'm honest. That might not be the case now. I haven't looked at a 40k rulebook in a long time, but certainly it used to be the case that if you were looking at a 40k rulebook and a fantasy rulebook, you would, the fantasy one would appear to have had a lot more effort put into its visual design. And I wonder if that might just be an aesthetic preference on my part, in fact, because I'm sure that given the money that was being made, plenty of effort was being put into the 40k one, and maybe the aesthetic just didn't speak to me. Or I guess inherently it's a slightly simpler, more, I don't know, maybe simple's the wrong word, like a brutal aesthetic, isn't it? Whereas I think fantasy kind of held on to a bit more of that, well, classic high fantasy setting feeling. Very intricate and detail oriented, and it always felt a bit like a monk might have written the book somewhere and you were getting hold of this fairly old kind of tome, as opposed to a rule book you just bought for like 60 quid or whatever they were back then. So I'm kind of just going for I picked out the biggest details so that they would be really bold, but then I'm kind of just overbrushing really, to try and get, there you go, that kind of definition in place in the wood. The good side is on these side pieces it's so heavily carved that you don't actually have to work that hard to get to it, whereas I think on these flat surfaces it's going to take quite a bit to try and create that wood effect. And my hope is that by kind of combining a couple of different things, you can create a fairly interesting sort of effect. And this is also my first time mixing heavy bodies directly with a miniature paint, in this case a scale 75. They appear to mix relatively well. Well, they haven't blown apart and caught fire or anything, so that's positive. Let's have a look. If I go in with those, what kind of response do I get? Oh yeah, that's quite bright, but that's kind of the point. So let's hit that along the edges, and this, as you've probably noticed with quite a few of my paint jobs now, kind of just feeling it out as I go. Not too much of a plan, just a general idea of what carved wood looks like. So we're going to come in, hit those areas. Now this has got metal edges on this particular bit, so maybe a little bit less of that one on there. That's an interesting change. So mixing that scale 75 into that heavy body acrylic started to dry a heck of a lot quicker, because that's one of the things I noticed when working with heavy bodies actually, was that the drying time was a heck of a lot longer, which I must admit, like, in of itself is quite a nice property to play with. Like, it remains one of my favourite things about working with oils, is that ability to mess with things. And actually that's come out quite nicely. I'm quite pleased with that. I'm not sure how well it's coming over on camera. Yeah, it's kind of there, but that's worked quite nicely. Those they've kind of blurred themselves together quite nicely by themselves. I've not really had to work those at all, so I might just hop over to the other side, do the same there before moving on, because I think I'm not sure about any of you, but once I start moving on with these things I tend to forget to go back. Let's go a little bit heavier on that this time. Maybe try and get it done in a fewer coats. Oh, a bit blocky there. Kind of the nice thing though about painting these heavily textured sections, don't have to be quite as careful as I otherwise might be. Like, there's so much texture there to absorb paint, especially with the heavy body. Like, it's very easy to accidentally go on a little heavy, cover things up, but I don't know whether it's the hand sculpted nature of slightly older miniatures, or just a chosen aesthetic, as it were. But when things were blockier, they were inherently kind of a little bit easier to go at with these tools, because there was just more texture, as I say, to absorb the paint, to resist it, to continue to kind of, I don't want to say overrule what you're doing, but like, I almost view it as a bit of a challenge. Like, are you sure you want to cover that up? Did you mean to drown that detail there? Oh, sorry, move that out of the camera. Let me that brush clean and go in with that same highlight. And I always quite like that, because it also means you've got uneven lines, and uneven lines are so much more interesting to paint. I think that's my biggest critique of like modern digital sculpts, is that they're all kind of perfect. Like, you know, everything is spot on. There's no accidental whimsy. If it's there, it's meant to be there. Whereas you can spot them on some old miniatures where it's like, oh, I don't think that was the original intent, but isn't it now interesting? Whether that's a wonky line or a, you know, whatever, it doesn't actually matter. There we are. So once I've got kind of the bulk of this down, what I'm probably going to do is hit it with a little bit of a light wash as well, just to really try and emphasise some of these lines. It may be an oil wash, but I'm thinking it can probably just be a normal wash, like maybe a Pro Acryl mixed with a little bit of flow improver, even just something real simple. We'll see how that goes. Might wanna go with the oils, just to help emphasize some of that NMM as well, because again, it's funny, even when you're painting the non-metallic areas, I find now that I am thinking about the NMM a lot more. So like, I'm painting this wood and I'm thinking, would this wood cause a particular kind of reflection up onto the pieces around it? Like, how would this be, how does this impact that? And I feel like that's been the nice thing about practicing NMM on this miniature, is that it's a simple model, you know, it's a cannon, it's a big old gun on some wheels. There's not that much to it, which is great, because it means I just need to think about a couple of colours, a couple of textures, a couple of finishes, one type of metal, which is huge. The minute I realised that, oh, actually, if I was painting this with metallics, I might go in with a couple of different types of metal. You know, I might have done some brass or maybe some gold embellishments, but actually painting it NMM really made me stop and think, first of all, why are you introducing all these different types of metal? Are they necessary? If they are, great, grand, carry on. If they're not, simplify. It also pushed me to think about kind of, again, like how those colours are going to interact. Are they going to sit well together? Just going to switch to that smaller brush now, because what I want to start doing is creating some kind of wood grain effects on the flat areas. So just here, let's put that there. Left it on the brush slightly too long there. That's the only thing. As we all know, once you get to small brushes, things dry out incredibly quickly. It's going to go into there, go into that. Get some different colour in there. This is the nice thing when you're doing something like this, you can kind of just grab for things and put some more lines down, blur them together. Doesn't need to be perfectly straight, doesn't need to be perfectly the right colour in the right place, it can just be some little lines just to give the impression that this is wood. And here's the rub, if you will. It's the need to do long straight lines down these back pieces. But straight away on those top ones, you can see how just a couple of lines make it feel a bit more like wood. Nothing complicated, nothing accurate, or again, all that planned, just enough to introduce the idea. Key challenge, of course, with getting them to go the whole way down without, there you go, going really thick. And that's always the challenge, because of course the longer we're doing this, the more likely it is that something goes horribly, horribly wrong. Good news is, I think, with this, I can kind of just come in with another colour. And I think as long as you introduce some striations there, get away with a surprising amount. There we are. That's now starting to look a little bit more like some actual wood that might exist somewhere. Again, we've got paint getting slightly too dry there, so hit it with a little bit of medium, get on the brush. And the nice thing with this, where it doesn't have to be all that accurate, is that I can just dance between the colours. And this is between those ones that I showed you at the start, the raw sienna, the birch, the walnut. No particular mixes, just kind of grabbing from each one on the palette. Though I guess it would be worth maybe coming in with the birch. There we are, just on the edges to give it a hard edge. But yeah, I think that works. That's done a decent job of creating a kind of wood effect. I think from there we can start moving beyond these sections. So I've got this section at the back, I've got the piece that goes across, and I've got the wheels. I'm not gonna, certainly with the wheels, I'm not gonna chase every angle. There's too many, basically. I'll make sure that there's, you know, a convincing shadow and whatnot, but I'm not gonna chase it indefinitely to make sure every single spoke is perfectly painted all the way around. It's not worth it. There's no real benefit to doing it. Just gonna hit the very extremities of these carvings with a bit of that raw birch that I just hit the edges with there, because I think that really actually elevated those areas. Just the very most pronounced bits. I think the fun thing about these old cannons is they put these strange carved faces on them. And they do have like really kind of quite bizarre kind of designs. But again, really nice because they kind of speak to the time in which they were sculpted. You know, you look at the modern plastic dwarf cannon and it's a perfectly serviceable cannon, but it has no character to it. That there's, you know, is metal cylinder with hole in the end, basically. Which I appreciate. That is exactly what a cannon is. This isn't a critique of the sculptor. They've done precisely what any sensible person would do when told to sculpt a dwarven cannon. They've sculpted some dwarves with cannonballs. They've sculpted a very sensible looking cannon. I believe the last time I looked at it, there's like some runes on it. You know, it absolutely fits the bill. But these old ones just had the benefit of, yeah, that little bit of craziness to them. That kind of like, I'm sorry you've painted it with, or painted it with, painting's me, but you know, I'm sorry you've designed the cannon to have faces carved into the side of it. Why? I guess why not? You know, things like that don't tend to get as much play today, unfortunately. And I guess that ultimately that comes down to what does the consumer want, right? I know I've seen kind of an increase recently in the number of people talking about how that actually they want things to be sculpted more simply. They want, you know, they want to be able to paint all the details on their miniature, which is not, by the way, an unreasonable request. You know, I've said it before that, you know, some of the miniatures now, I'm a big fan of whimsy and detail that doesn't need to be there, but some of the miniatures are so detailed that it's not fun to paint them. At least not for me. Like at that point, it kind of gets on for being a job to sit there and work through the details, and that's the point at which, like, for me personally, the fun starts to suffer just for the sake of you know, an extra bit of detail here or this here or whatever the addition might be. It, you know, I come to the conclusion that it isn't worth it, kind of thing. Walnut. As much as you don't need with this approach to really kind of keep colours perfectly matching, I like to try and get them relatively close. Kind of just for my own sanity, really. There's always some variation, but if you're going to argue that all the wood came from the same thing, it probably, therefore, in a fantasy world, would all have come from the same tree, and therefore would at least look somewhat similar. You know, it's not going to go from being a kind of silvery oak to an ash all of a sudden. That would make no sense. But there's no reason they couldn't have run out of oak and started using an ash halfway through. It would, you know, seem odd, but no reason it couldn't be the case. There we are. So I'm going to call that good at the back. I don't want to spend, as I say, a huge amount of time and energy on something that doesn't matter. Did completely forget about this section, but we'll drop a couple of lines in there. Bit of birch. Mix that in. Job done. And this is the thing, like a lot of the stuff on this miniature has just been like, hey, let's see if that works. And how about this? Does that work? Hey, that works too. And that doesn't. And all this sort of thing. So now it's just the front carriage and the wheels. And then obviously the base. But that's okay. We can work through that. Let's start with some work along the front here. Again, here I'm just going to go with little sketchy lines. I think where the window's currently open in here, and it's causing the paint to dry really quickly on the brush, and in fact on the miniature. It's very difficult to get them to mix nicely, but well, you know, good enough, as they say. There we go, that's better. The other really great thing actually about using medium is that I tend to find it's much better at sort of slowing down drying in warm weather, whereas I tend to find that water, you know, obviously adding water will stop a paint drying out, but it doesn't really slow down the drying process much during kind of hot weather. I tend to find it just kind of evaporates just the same as the standard water in the paint does. I think my approach with the wheels is kind of going to be similar to everything else. Little sketchy lines, nothing too precise. Nothing that can be traced back to a kind of, oh, I can see what you intended for here and you missed it kind of feel. There we go, get a bit of that. A few little sketchy lines. Bit around the edge, bit on there, bit on there. Like the little bits on the inside of the gun carriage are always a little bit, I don't know, for me I always kind of wonder, like, is there any point in painting these? I feel like with this first NMM miniature, plus, like, you know, my whole army only, you know, when even at kind of, I think it's like the 6,000 point list, I run like 4 or 5 cannons. Like, it's not that much extra work to be, to just take a moment. Ooh, that's a bit heavy. To go back in and add a little extra to this. And I think as long as it's not that much extra, it makes sense to do it. But I must admit, I am looking forward to having a little battery of these dudes. Like I say, at that kind of high point game, getting to play with, like, basically at that point, like an entire unit of cannons. It's very cool. And like, they'll all have say like engineers, well, not all of them, but you know what I mean. Like, I'll have engineers as some of the heroes in the list, so that they can be like embedded rather than just being sat there, which again just kind of gives rise to like some cool kind of modelling and hobby opportunities, really, in terms of thinking about like how does a dwarf army entrench its guns. Like, there was a stunning, like really stunning cannon entrenchment made by Forge World for Empire cannons. And I'd quite like to see if I can get hold of one of those. See if it fits a dwarf cannon for a start. I'd have no idea if it would. It might be too small of a... might be too small, but it equally might not. And if it's not, it's well worth exploring, because it was just nice. It was all kind of sandbags and earthworks, which I really like, actually. So I think the temptation with, especially with dwarves, is to build something fairly like heavy looking and stone based, but when you think about entrenching a cannon, like no one's gonna, even dwarves are not always defending their keep. You know, you're not always on the home turf, and assuming that to be the case, realistically you're gonna create your entrenchments with whatever's around, which is always pretty much gonna be earthworks. Like, earthworks you can do anywhere. That's kind of the whole point of them. I don't know, I just kind of think that maybe makes more sense. I think also what I've realised here is that I'm just going to have to go in with a slightly lighter middle shade, hit it with a wash, and then perhaps just highlight the edges up, because it's all kind of got a bit mushy. The detail in those wheels is not as clear as some of the other areas of the miniature, and so it's all got a bit jumbled, but that's okay. I think this is still perfectly doable. I said at the start, obviously, that this is not a precise paint job. I guess it's more of a test. It's the first of the cannons that I need to paint, first of the war machines even. Like, for those who missed my previous discussion about what I have in my dwarf army, there's not too many war machines, but it is still a dwarf army. So there are perhaps more war machines than many people might assume in a relatively small army, but yeah. Sorry, I hadn't realised I had shifted the cannon there out of view. So let's bring this down and round. There we go. Just going to hit the spokes with the same highlight as I have the wheel, and just do the outward facing things, and kind of try and be deliberately a little bit kind of choppy, like it might impart a little bit of a wood texture. Tell you what, these brushes need a good clean and condition. I think they've seen better days already. There we are. Right. So I think now the plan is grab the old I think brown wash, if I'm honest, from Pro Acryl. Somewhere around I've got a little hard palette. There we are. These are great little hard palettes. I just use these little like 99p ones. They're fantastic. Like, once you've used all the bits up, sling them in the washing up. I'm just going to do a couple of parts wash, and then just add an absolute ton of water to it. really just thin it down. There we are. That's better. And now, one thing I've been doing more of recently is just adding a little dash of airbrush flow improver to the washes, just to break that surface tension and really really help draw it in towards kind of crevices and all that sort of stuff. So with that done, not going to go crazy, sticking with my size 2, just going to go into the areas that do have texture that might be able to help me. That's lifting that paint up ever so slightly, so I'm actually just going to stop there and instead just drop it into a few of the areas. I think again I'm deliberately going to be a little bit sort of inconsistent with this application, just to try and cause a little bit of variation in what this wood ends up looking like. Almost kind of stippling it on. I do like these Pro Acryl washes, I must admit. They give a really nice finish. They're simple, they're reliable. They don't stain like other washes either, in my experience. Like they stain, but they don't. They kind of don't. I don't know. Exhibit some of the big flat surface staining that that I get a little bit frustrated with on some of the workshop washes, and the Army Painter ones do it as well. It's not like a workshop issue. Washes in general do. They stain. That's kind of what they're designed to do in a way. But there are times when they do it and it's in a very what I would describe as non-ideal manner. Just gonna hit the rest of these little sections now. The only other thing is, having done the NMM first, I find I'm now spending a lot of time trying really hard not to undo that work. Just going to drop in some of this wash down the sides of the carriage. Really make sure that's all in. There we are. Lovely stuff. And with that, we're getting very close to this being done. In all honesty, like, there's not really much left other than the base. Now, this is the other thing that this is a bit of a test for, if I'm honest, because I've really not decided what I want to do with basing these. Like, I'm quite tempted by the classic dark grey, light grey, couple of tufts. It is very dull, I guess, but at the same time, it kind of nails what I'm after with dwarves, right? They aren't, they aren't going to be existing in the desert. They aren't going to be roaming around in strange places. But at the same time, I don't want them to be super dull. So I'm kind of wondering, what if I went in with a sort of slight bluish tint, or maybe purplish tint. So I've got my titanium white there, and I'm wondering if, rather than going up from black, if I go from Payne's grey and maybe mix in a bit of dioxine purple, maybe? I don't know. And I'm sort of thinking, what if I sort of put in some different flocks, maybe dropped a little bit of snow in, depending on how this all starts to look. Like, that might be really dumb, but I don't know. But I'm going to start from Payne's grey. Mix in a little bit of this purple. These are both really dark, really intense Series 1, Series 2 colours. Meaning they are, I believe, let's have a look, Yeah, the dioxine purple is just a single pigment. Obviously, titanium white's single pigment. Payne's grey is a triple pigment, but it's a Series 1 paint, and it's fully opaque and has a light fastness rating of 1, so is pretty light fast as a multi-pigment paint goes. So we should be in a good place here. So then I think if I can find, I always like to base with like a bit of a naff brush. I don't like using good brushes for basing. That always seems daft to me. That seems like asking for trouble. Good news is I've got an absolute ton of old brushes that we can have a look through and see if we can find a sensible brush. I was hoping that I would remember where I'd put that flat army painter brush, but I actually don't recall where I put it. That's a bit soft, that's a bit gummy. Incredible, you can have so many brushes and then not have the one brush that you actually need in the moment of needing it. In all seriousness, actually, if I can't find the brush, I might delay the basing ever so slightly, just so that I can, just so that I can make sure we get this right. Yeah, good news is that wash is doing largely what I want it to do. Let's have a look. Okay, so I think I've probably lost that brush. I think what I'm going to do in that case is go in with this, what is this, Wargamer Monster Brush. Monster Brush. I must admit, I dislike silly names on products. I think I've just found the brush I was looking for. I have, huzzah! It's a large dry brush. I mean, it's not very large, it's the wrong shape to be a dry brush, but whatever. So, this is currently based using, what's it currently based with? It's just the undercoat spray, the Mr. Hobby stuff, which is phenomenal, by the way. Like, really blew me away with how good it is as a primer. Went on super easy through the airbrush, is really nice and matte. You can probably see it in the sand there. Yeah, just absolutely spot on. But what I'm thinking now is, if I get the little bit of the Payne's grey, which is a lot bluer than I expected it to be, a little bit of the purple, a bit more of the Payne's, more of the Payne's grey. So it turns out the purple, incredibly strong. Going to need a lot of Payne's grey in there to counter that. Slightly concerned I may not be able to counter it. Let's get a little bit of medium in there and see what sort of colour we are creating. A little bit of white. Okay. So I'm not totally sold on what's being mixed, but the good news is it's a dry brush over black. So ultimately, if we get started and we don't like what we're doing, we can just stop. Oh dear. That's kind of what I was afraid of. Note to self, don't let water literally run down the handle of your brush when trying to dry brush. So let's fix that side later, shall we? In the meantime, let's I'm just knocking off as much of the paint as possible onto a kitchen towel here. And that's just starting to impart a little bit of colour there. You can just see it in the light. Not a lot, which is fine because it's the first coat. like where I've got a lot of dwarves to do in regiments, I think if I go with this effect, I'll try and find a slightly higher value for the first colour. Dry brushing over black, like it's fine to go up in a few when we're talking about one model, but when we're talking about, hey, a unit of 30 iron breakers or whatever, I don't really want to have to do like 3 or 4 stages on the base. I'd rather hit it with like a right bam, go in with the first dry brush, second dry brush, maybe some touches from there, and then we're done. And it's, or we're adding then the, whether it's tufts or snow or whatever I land on eventually for the mid stage of this. So now let's go to something a little bit lighter. I say a little bit lighter, this is quite a bit lighter. This is quite a sizable jump. I'm not sure how well it will come out on camera though. I say it's quite a sizable jump. It looked like quite a sizable jump, but I think this is that prime example of like something can look like it's going to be a big jump, then you put it on the model and you realise it's nowhere near as big as you thought it was going to be. Yeah, this is growing on me actually, I must admit. I was worried that it was going to be a bit too pinky purpley given the strength of that purple dioxin, but actually it's looking alright. That a little bit more along the back. Then from where I am, just a bit more white mixed into it. Go. So towards the top end, it does get to be a little bit, I don't even know how to describe it, almost lilac-y. That may not be ideal, but we'll get it on there and we'll see how it looks on the Mini. Oh yeah, actually that looks fine, doesn't it? But I'm not sure I'll go any higher, but that's probably fine. That's sufficient, I think. I think the biggest thing for me was it just not being black to white, standard greys, but at the same time I don't want to paint the bases purple or blue or pink or whatever. I want them to look like, I say realistic, the last thing I want is realism, but you know what I mean. Yeah, I think that Payne's grey is the colour that's used in the darkest areas of the cannon as well, so I feel like mixing that in has probably helped a little bit, in terms of like, why is it reflecting that element of blue in the silver? It's coming from the ground now, seems very obvious. And what I might just do is just one last coat of this, just take it up one more mix towards white, just on the extremities of the base, just really give it just a light touch of that. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm pretty pleased with that. That's come out better than I had hoped, if I'm honest. Or, well, certainly better than I thought it would. It's got just enough of that bluey grey indigo colour in it that it's there, but it's still ultimately a sensible stony base. Let's get that wiped off. I think actually that was That was a bigger deal than I kind of thought it was going to be, given the impact those colours had on the NMM. So I'm quite pleased that worked out, because it was a concern. If it didn't, it would have been problematic, to say the least. Next up is, of course, everyone's favourites, I should say, tufts. So I am a super cheap sod when it comes to this stuff. Like, this is the first army. Oops. Sorry about that, I was getting my box of tufts. This is the first army where I've actually used pre-made tufts. Generally, I am an adamant kind of no, you blob the glue on and you glue on static grass kind of guy. But given that this is a bit of a, centerpiece army, I invested in one of these at the Mega Tub of Tufts off eBay. Yes, eBay, very cheap, I did mention it. But it gives you a nice mix of, like, very arid ones, sort of bright, but prairie green ones, incredible neon green ones that doesn't really show up on camera how green they are, little ones with flowers, nice things like that. And I kind of figured, hey, it would be nice to be able to do some mixes of things, as especially in the kind of mountainous areas that the dwarves tend to dwell in. You do get this kind of mix of slightly unusual stuff growing. So what I'm thinking is a couple of tufts and then also some snow. To kind of really try and mix it up a little bit. And these are kind of quite tall tufts. And then I've also got some little kind of tight, low tufts. I wonder if there are any in this box, actually. No, I don't think there are. I think they're all in a different set of packs. But I don't know if I need any of those, to be honest, for this one. I'm kind of thinking a couple of little bits, maybe kind of just in front of the cannon. As if it stopped there, maybe a little tuft off to the side. So maybe, hang on, if I know the wisdom these days is that you use a what do you call it, set of tweezers, but I'm a bit of a savage when it comes to stuff like that, so in that goes. That's then got something there. I think it's always nice to, given the look of that, I think what I'm going to do is go for one of these grasses just there, trying to just kind of capture that illusion of, hey, these were here before the cannon was. This isn't like a there we are. I think the effect of them being trapped under the back of the cannon kind of helps with that, rather than being kind of perfectly arrayed. Got those there, slightly offset from each other, the one at the front. That might be enough, yeah, I think for now I'm gonna stop there. With the tufts, there's a danger of over tufting miniatures, as we all know. They can work really nicely, but they can also just look messy after a point. It does kind of look a little bit, it feels like it's missing something, but I almost don't want to add anything else. I always wonder, do I add more of the similar sort of thing? Like, if I went in with these, this is a slightly different colour to them, but they're the same kind of plant layout as that first one. If I just dropped that in on this side and sort of propped it up a little bit, and then maybe added Ooh, I think I've got a little bit of kind of inspo here. Is that maybe they've basically just ploughed this cannon into a bit of hedgerow. And from here it will it'll take up its firing position, kind of thing. Yeah, I quite like that, actually. I think that's quite... I think that'll work. Weirdly, I think that wheel just shifted, but I don't quite know how. It's all glued down, so I'm going to say it was just in my brain. Right. Okay, so we've got a lot of tufts, 5 tufts on that now. That's probably sufficient to create a reasonably embedded effect. Might just need to add something to the rear there, actually, just to give that wheel a bit of bedding in. There we go. So now we've got this kind of, okay, we've stopped on a, we've rammed the cannon into a hedgerow, it'll be fine there kind of look. Which in fairness, if you're going to try and shoot some Chaos Knights or something, the hedges probably aren't your primary concern. So with that done, I'm going to move on to snow. So, I love putting snow on, there's something about snow on dwarf miniatures that's just nice. I use this old Games Workshop modelling snow. So when they sold this pot was like half full, and I was like, oh, that's outrageous. And now obviously it's all these years later, and I'm still working my way through it. Like, it's just an insane amount of stuff to use. I will probably never get through it all. All you do is mix it in with a little bit of varnish to harden it. So I'm just going to grab that now. And the really good news is it doesn't really matter what kind of varnish you use, because of course you're going to, well, in my case I'm going to matte varnish the whole thing anyway. So I'm just going to drop a dollop of that down to here. Then I'll use that monster brush thing for this once I'm ready. Mix it in, and almost immediately it just starts to clump up. I actually need a bit more varnish on this particular occasion. And this is killer to your brushes, just to set your mind at ease there. Like, yes, this will utterly destroy your brush. So do not do this with a brush that you like or want to keep or anything like that. And then, kind of just like any other snow effect, we're just going to come in and start dolloping it on. And you can see the kind of effect it has. Sorry, sounding very odd there because I've had to just add a load more of this stuff. Really important though to make sure I get a whole bunch of it on top of these tufts that I've chosen to apply as well, because like snow falls everywhere basically, and if I'm going to have these tufts in there, they've got to have some snow on them. It is the kind of place it would naturally gather. The really good news though is that actually this stuff is super easy to work with. And yes, it will totally destroy the brush, but synthetic brush doesn't really matter. I tend to get maybe 5 or 6 uses out of them for this sort of thing. Thus my kind of like, yeah, I'm using an army painter brush for that. I'm not using one of my nice brushes kind of thing, because that would be a waste. Like any kind of sable brush, whether it's this, whether it's what do you call it, like oil paints, whatever it might be, it's not what they're made for, and it's a tremendous waste of a good brush to use them for it. The great thing about this stuff as well is that you can just keep grabbing it, applying a bit more, adding a bit more of whatever you're using. So like I say, I use varnish. I think varnish works really well. Dries obviously quite hard. So yeah. But, you know, I know other people who use paint medium. Paint medium was a recent one that I came across someone using, and it seems to work really well for them. Like, I was surprised, if I'm honest. I didn't think paint medium would dry kind of hard enough for it to work, but they showed me it, you know, a week later, and there it was, working absolutely fine. So I have to, you know, their credit where it's due. It's, if it works, it's not a stupid idea, as they say. So yeah, my whole thing here really is just to try and really try and get this to be a somewhat realistic effect. Like, snow is one of those substances where it almost doesn't matter what you do, it's not gonna look quite right, because snow behaves weirdly, but I'm of the opinion that that will end up looking about as good as it was ever likely to end up looking. I think it's got all the colours in there that it needed to have. And you can see over the years I've used the lid of this pot for a lot of different things. But no, I think overall that will be fine. That will do its job. It will look enough like snow that no one will feel too aggrieved about it. I've actually ended up being able to see very little of that base that I was worried about the colours on, which is great. One thing I can see though is that some of the colouring from the tufts is going to leach into the snow. I'm going to need to go in with just some white paint, I should imagine, at the end, and just touch some of those up. But we'll wait and see what happens. Worst case scenario, it will just be a job of tearing them out and replacing them. Because yeah, you can see here actually where there's been some kind of reactivation. Yeah, once that is fully dry, you can go in, touch it up with some white paint, it'll look fine. But in the meantime, that is the first dwarf cannon done for my old world army. Non-metallic metals, very simple kind of hand-painted wood effect to turn those flat surfaces into something textured, and what I think is a reasonable snowy base. Like, not brilliant, not perfect by any stretch, but I think reasonable for the time and effort involved in creating it. Thanks for joining, and hopefully I'll see you in a future stream.